Good afternoon, gentle listeners. It's Erin, your librarian storyteller for the day. Welcome back to Legend and Lore, where every week I'll be telling you a handful of myths, folktales, and fairy tales that come from different cultures from all around the world, from Japan to South Africa, from Greece to Polynesia. For our final entry into this series, in our last week, I'll be regaling you with some ancient Greek legend and lore. Now make sure you stick around because at some point I'll be giving out a keyword to enter into your summer reading account. If you participate and earn enough points through these keywords, you just might win a fabulous prize. With that PSA out of the way, let me give you a little background into the world of Greek mythology. Greek myths are among the most well-known and the most entertaining of mythologies, so much so that the Romans basically copied it for their own society, essentially just changing some of the names, which is how we got to the names of the planets. Regardless, Greek mythology covers a variety of topics: the origin of the world, the activities of gods, demigods, monsters, and heroes, and several of the terminologies and symbols we still use today. In fact, much of Western civilization has been inspired by Greek mythology, from language and culture to art and media. With that, let me begin our first story. As I said, I like to try to start things off at the beginning. So, let me tell you the Greeks' interpretation of the origin of the world, the beginning of the Titans, and the birth of the Olympian gods. In the beginning, there was nothing. Nothing but chaos, that is. But out of this empty void of madness emerged Gaia, also known as Mother Earth. And at her side, several other entities came into being. Eros, the embodiment of love, the abyss, the darkness of Tartarus, and Erebus, the embodiment of shadow and darkness. Also from this emergence came forth Uranus, the sky, who fell deeply, madly in love with Gaia, and she with him. Every night, Uranus would cover Gaia, and the two would join, and from their union came children. First came the Titans, great, powerful, and beautiful beings. There were 6 men: Coeus, Crius, Kronos, Hyperion, Iphitus, and Oceanus, and 6 women: Mezzanine, Phoebe, Rhea, Thea, Themis, and Tethys. However, not just beauty was emerged from their union, for Gaia and Uranus were also responsible for birthing this one-eyed Cyclopses, as well as the 100-handed ones, horrible and horrific-looking monsters that Uranus was absolutely ashamed of. As a result, he threw his beastly children into Tartarus, where he could never see them, and they would be locked for all eternity. In doing so, Gaia became enraged. A mother through and through, she loved her children, all of her children, regardless of their appearances, and so she began to plot against her husband. She convinced her youngest son, Kronos, that he must overthrow his father, violently, if necessary. Agreeing with his mother, Kronos took a sickle and raised it up high, striking his father, castrating him in the process. A deep gash split across the heavens, and Uranus, fearful for his life and terribly wounded, was chased off of his mighty pedestal and disappeared further and further into the sky, where he would only look down at the world from afar and never again interfere. As a result, Kronos became king, ruler of the world and the universe, becoming the ruler of the Titans and taking his sister wife Rhea as a consort, with the other Titans, his brothers and sisters, swearing loyalty to him. However, despite his victory, Kronos did not fulfill his promise to Gaia. He too was disgusted by the Cyclopses, by the 100-handed ones, and refused to free them from Tartarus. As a result, Gaia became enraged again, and she began to secretly plot against her son. But during all of this, Kronos was unafraid, at least of his mother, because he had a deeper fear, waking in the madness of power that was set upon him. He deeply feared that time would repeat itself, history would repeat, and his children would do the same to Kronos as Kronos had done to Uranus. As a result, every time Rhea, his sister wife, gave birth, Kronos would snatch the child from her arms and swallow it whole, where down his gullet they would go, resting in his belly, one after another. First Hestia, then Hades, then Demeter, then Poseidon, then Hera, and finally Zeus. Except Zeus was never swallowed, for Rhea had something in common with Gaia. She too loved her children, and she was determined to save them. Just one, if she could. When Zeus was born, she replaced him with a stone wrapped in a blanket and handed it to Kronos. Kronos, not seeing the difference, swallowed the stone and thinking he was safe. Meanwhile, Zeus was spirited away to a cave where he was nursed by a goat and raised by nymphs, waiting, aging, growing, until the day he would be considered an adult and strong enough to confront his father. While plotting with the nymph Metis, who in turn would become Zeus's first wife, they were able to trick Kronos into eating an emetic, also known as a soup that would encourage vomiting. As a result, Kronos threw up his children, one after the other. First came Hera, then Poseidon, then Demeter, then Hades, then Hestia. Out they came. And the gods were free. However, despite their many numbers, they were still not strong enough to fight Kronos. Hiding away for a time, Zeus and his brothers went down into the underworld to keep the promise that their father and grandfather had ruined so long ago. They freed the Cyclopses, and they freed the 100-handed ones. And in gratitude, the Cyclopses gave Zeus thunder and the lightning bolts, and lightning which he still wields today. They gave Poseidon the mighty trident, which he could use to wield over the seas. And they gave Hades a helmet of invisibility, so he could walk in the shadows and remain hidden. Together with his brothers and his sisters, the Cyclopses and the 100-handed ones, Zeus and everyone at his side were able to overthrow Kronos, as well as the other Titans, in a great and vicious battle. Kronos and the rest of the Titans were cast into Tartarus to take the place of the Cyclopses and the 100-handed ones. The Titanesses were given pardon and allowed to remain in the world. One male Titan, remained, Atlas. The one who fought directly against Zeus and acted as a worthy foe was punished instead by having to hold up the sky to keep it from crushing the earth. After this battle, drawing lots, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades divided up the world between them. Zeus won the sky, the air, and the heavens, making his home on Mount Olympus. Poseidon won the waters, the oceans, and the deep, deep depths. and made his home there. And Hades won the underworld, the world of the dead, where every mortal must go. The earth itself, Gaia, could not be claimed, and was instead left to all three of them, each ruling a portion of it in their own way. And for a while, all seemed well. Mortals came upon the earth, gods ruled above, and everyone sang the praises of this golden age. All except Gaia, who even in her victory was furious, with Zeus this time, for how she had treated the Titans themselves. Because remember, Gaia is a mother, and she loves all of her children, no matter their appearance, no matter their actions. What later would come, the adventures and the battles to follow, are stories for another time. That is the first story I have to tell you. The second story is not so much a story about a god itself, but a fact that even the gods themselves can be subject to human error and are imperfect even in their mightiness. Piggybacking off the last one, Metis and Zeus's marriage did not last long, but again, that's a story for another time. In the end, however, Zeus wed, like his father before him, Zeus wed his sister wife, Hera, known through all as the goddess of marriage, childbirth, and care. Funnily enough, because Hera and Zeus's marriage was not exactly a happy one. Mighty and strong, Zeus is also known as a bit of a playboy, willing and happy to sleep with men, women, animals, inanimate objects, doesn't matter. But quite a few of the heroes of old, as well as some of the gods on Mount Olympus, originate because Zeus couldn't keep it in his pants. Hera, understandably, is not always very happy about this. But because she cannot take revenge upon her husband, for he is the king of the gods and too strong for her, she instead takes her vengeance out on those he beds and their children. One most notable story is the story of Leto, daughter of a Titan, lover of Zeus, and mother of the god Apollo and the goddess Artemis. Hidden away in her home, Leto was naive about many of the ways of the world. But even she was open to charm and wonder, and that is what Zeus brought to her. However, her dalliance with Zeus caused Hera to look down and feel furious, not just because of her romance, but because Leto was pregnant with twins. So absolutely furious with this, Hera cursed Leto, daughter of Croesus and Phoebe, to not be able to find a single stable piece on earth to deliver children. She forbid it. No stable piece of earth would be allowed to give Leto harbor, to give her sanctuary. And so, well past her due date, Leto traveled the world, seeking desperately for a place to rest. Constantly in labor and in great pain, she wandered all across Greece. But no piece of land, no door, no residence, no one would allow her refuge, terrified of Hera's anger. Finally, in pity, Zeus separated an island from the sea, the island of Delos, so that Leto would be able to find land, but would also fall under the guidances that Hera had given. Finally, with a semblance of calm and certainty, she rested, and then her true pain would begin. Hera, being the goddess of childbirth and marriage, refused to send her emissaries down to aid Leto in childbirth, and so Leto had to do it herself. First came Artemis, surprisingly painless and calm. But the birth of her son Apollo lasted for 9 days and 9 nights. Artemis herself, just a newborn, was forced to grow up quickly and act as midwife to her ailing mother. Finally, after that, those long, long 9 days and nights, Apollo came into the world, as did this, along with the sun emerging. And for a time, the family of 3 was happy, peaceful, until the day the family was summoned to Mount Olympus. Leto, Apollo, and Artemis entered the halls to see Zeus sitting on his magnificent throne at the end. He smiled and bade his children to come and sit in his lap, and promised he would give them anything that they asked. Artemis went first, eager and certain in what she wanted. She said she wanted a silver chariot pulled by stags. She wanted a silver bow and arrow. She wanted nymphs and dryads and all of the woods and forests to be her hunting grounds. And she also wanted, begging her father, to never, ever be forced to marry or lay with anyone, possibly reminiscent of the pain that her mother had gone through. Regardless, Zeus agreed to her terms, and thus Artemis became the goddess of the hunt and the moon. Apollo held back, did not voice what he wanted just yet. So in return, Zeus gave adjacent gifts to his son: a golden chariot, a golden bow and arrow, and the powers of music, art, and the sun. And thus Apollo, the god of the sun and music and artistry, came into being. Leto, meanwhile, did not become a goddess. She was content. She never loved again, happy to simply watch over her children. But that is not to say that her life was not completely devoid of adventure. One such incident comes to mind. After Leto had given birth to her children, and after all 3 were risen to Mount Olympus to live on as gods, they were, of course, deified by the mortals, prayed to and given supplicants and offerings. However, in the city of Thebes, there was an arrogant queen named Niobe, claiming there was no need to sacrifice to Leto. She herself was a mother of 14 children, 7 women, 7 men, so a much greater number than 2. So insulted were Apollo and Artemis on behalf of the mother their mother, that they took vengeance. And with 14 arrows notched and released, each one of Niobe's children fell down dead. In response for this loss, Niobe's husband, the king, took his own life. And Niobe, wrecked with pain and grief, wandered mad and confused, broken, sobbing and sobbing. At last it said that whether it was Zeus or Leto herself, no one is sure, but the gods took pity on Niobe in her suffering, turning Niobe into a stone so she would no longer feel pain. And so it is said, even today, there is a stone in Thebes that continues to weep tears for the fate of many beloved children. And that is the story of Leto. With that, we are going to go into our keyword of the day. In fact, our keyword of the day is, as I just said, Leto. Capital, all capitals now, L-E-T-O, Leto. Our next story, and final one for today, is very reminiscent of those great Homer tragedies, the Iliad, and how it came about. The Battle of Troy, the great hero Achilles, the Trojan horse. How did it all come to be? Would you believe that it all happened because of a woman? And before that, it happened because of 3. And before that, because of a lost invitation. Let me start at the beginning. This is the tale of the judgment of Paris, explaining the events that led up to the Trojan War and even eventually the foundation of Rome. The story begins with a grand celebration, a wedding feast for the marriage of Peleus, a mortal, a king, and Thetis, a sea nymph and a goddess of the water. How did two such unlikely folks meet? Let's just say it was carefully arranged, because Thetis has a bit of a history to her as well. It's been prophesied that any child of Thetis's will become much greater than his father. Well, learning from past experience, Zeus didn't want that to happen, so he was very quick to marry Thetis off to a mortal. That way, whatever child resulted from their union would be great indeed, but would not be so great that they could challenge a god. Regardless, the wedding was a grand celebration, full of life, laughter, music, and succulence. All of the gods were invited. All of the demigods were invited. It seems like everyone had an invitation to this party. Except for one. Eris, the goddess of discord. Let's just say her invitation was purposely lost. She's a mischief maker, dear Eris, and no one wants chaos and craziness in a negative way at a wedding, making the party unpleasant for everybody. Eris was not exactly pleased by this lack of attention and felt deeply left out by the whole affair. As punishment, even though she was uninvited, she decided to attend and make a little mischief of her own. She arrived at the celebration with a single golden apple, kept where they grew in the garden of Hesperides. With a mighty toss, she threw it into the proceedings, calling out, "It's for the fairest!" Everyone looked, everyone stared, but only 3 goddesses reached out to claim the prize. Hera, queen of the gods and goddess of marriage and childbirth; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Each believing wholeheartedly that they were the fairest. They fought amongst themselves, furious. Finally, they turned to Zeus and told him, "You must judge, out of us 3, who is the fairest." Now, I want to say that despite being a playboy, Zeus is not an idiot. There's no clear winner when you have to choose between your wife and your daughters-ish. So, being in a rare display of wisdom, Zeus passed the buck. He asked Hermes, the god of the messenger god, to fetch an objective third party, an objective deciding figure. He decided that Paris, a Trojan mortal, a prince in truth, though unknowing of his true heritage, would be the one to decide. He had proven himself to Zeus before, and thus to Zeus he seemed the perfect judge. So it was decided, and the goddesses all agreed. So Hermes went to fetch Paris for where he currently worked, herding sheep. Returning with Paris, the four parties went to Mount Ida and asked Paris, "Who among us is the fairest?" Looking at all 3 goddesses, Paris was at a loss for words. They were all beautiful. They were all magnificent. How in the world could he choose? The answer was bribery. Clever as they were, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each brought a little something in order to tip the scales in their favor. Hera claimed that in return for the apple, she would make Paris a king, not just a king of a city, but a king of a continent, multiple continents. Europe and Asia, as they were known, as they existed in that times, would be his to rule and control all of his life. Power, royalty, wealth would be his. Athena was next, and she offered Paris her personal wisdom and tutelage in the skill of war and scholarship. He would know nearly anything, so much so that he would gain such great renown both in battle and in politics that none would be able to fool him, trick him, or best him. He would lead armies. He would lead minds. His mind would be the prize of the millennia. Finally, it was Aphrodite's turn. Using her wits and her wiles, she smiled and said that for the apple, she would gift to Paris the most beautiful woman in the world, known to us as Helen of Troy. She claimed that she would fill both Paris's heart and Helen's was such an overwhelming source of love that they would be meant for one another. And so Paris had a decision to make, and choose he did. Taking the apple in his hand, looking at each of the goddesses in turn, he finally held it out to Aphrodite. Taking the apple in her hand, she grinned in her victory. And Paris said, "When shall I have her? When shall she be mine?" Aphrodite looked at Paris and said, "She is not an item to which I can give. However, the love you bear and the love she now bears will make you capable of winning her heart and making her your own. Go forth and claim her hand." What Aphrodite did not mention, however, was that Helen of Troy was originally Helen of Sparta, and she was already married to the great Greek king Menelaus. Thus, in the events that would follow, the stealing of Helen, the rising of armies, the sack of Troy, and all the great and terrible deaths that so many heroes and demigods would find themselves among, were soon to follow. Tragedy and beauty. In Greek mythology, they come hand in hand. And that's all I have for you today, gentle listeners. Thank you so much for joining me for this series, and I hope this has inspired you to look a little deeper into the world of mythology. There are so many amazing stories that different cultures have created to explain the world and how it works, and so many inspirational tales that are birthed because of it. Fantasy and imagination and belief can birth some of the most fantastic tales of them all. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Be well, and I hope to see you soon for another series. Goodbye.